signing in online, but I will be there in person very soon.
Miles, honey. Miles.
And if you look at the deceleration come out, you would notice that it moves that still deserves the right to respond to the time of whatever we
Hello.
Ah, there you go.
Can you hear us online?
Yes, we can.
But it's using the computer.
That's okay. But
Now we can't.
Okay, so you can
Now I'm
use
gonna
that
turn, yeah, I'm gonna turn
mic.
down the volume. Say something, Tracy.
Say something, Tracy.
I don't know, I think you should just,
I think it's
use
fine.
that
Yeah, I think
mic and
it's
then I can
okay.
play with it tomorrow.
No, use this,
Okay.
yeah, we're using
Yeah.
this mic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to begin all over again.
rewind.
Yeah, so we called the meeting to order at 7:07, but we had a tech issue. Can you hear me, Tracy? Okay, so we called the meeting to order at 7:07, but there's a tech issue because you could not hear us online. So we're going to begin again with introductions. I'm Wayne Benjamin. I chair land use for CB12, and I'd like to have my fellow committee members introduce themselves, starting at my left.
I'm Chris Whitaker. I'm a new member as of this past year, and I also serve on business development.
My name is Daniel Bonilla. I'm an artist, and these blackberries are tart. Just repeating everything I said.
I'm Heidi Guzman. I am the assistant chair of this committee.
I'm Jim Berlin. I'm also on the Traffic and Transportation Committee. I'm also the board parliamentarian. And to repeat what I also said, I've been around for a while.
Wonderful. And for the committee members who are online, now that you can hear us, Tracy?
Hi, I'm Tracy McNeil, Land Use Committee, also on Parks and Cultural Affairs. Hope everyone's having a good evening.
Absolutely. Indiana?
Hello, Indiana Porta, walking in the door right now, and I am on this committee and on Housing and Human Services. Thank you.
Thank you, Indiana. And OC?
Hi, I'm Osi Kaminer.
Thank you, OC. And let me just check to see if we have any other board members. No. So at the general meeting of CB12 in April, there was, during public session, quite a bit of discussion by members of the public concerning the status of Fort Washington Collegiate Church. And at the general meeting, stakeholders were referred to the Land Use Committee to, discuss the matter in greater detail. So no one has specifically outreach to the office, but we've put it on the agenda with the anticipation that there are stakeholders who would like to discuss the matter. And I see one hand from Amelia, although I may be pronouncing it wrong, but let me allow you to talk, and we'll see if you're here to discuss that. So you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hello. Hello?
Yes,
You can hear me.
I can hear you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Am I on visuals? I can't see myself on the screen. No,
No, your
just audio.
camera is not on. And could
Okay.
you pronounce your first name for us? Because I think I butchered it.
Amalia.
Amalia. I was close.
You're pretty close. I don't see a way to turn on my camera, but we don't have to fuss with it if it's not important. But yes, I am here to talk about the Fort Washington Collegiate Church campus closure. So as you said, we have met with the community board a couple weeks ago, the general meeting, and then last week we also were at the Housing and Human Services meeting where they passed a resolution opposing the closure. I think it was a resolution. There was some technical question about it, what exactly was going to get passed. So that's what we're up to. What would be helpful? Like I know some people are on other committees that have already been talking about it. Should I give an overview of
Yeah,
what?
I think we should, because I was not aware that you're going to Housing and Human Services, and I think I mentioned during the general meeting, this really is not a land use matter. It doesn't really pertain to zoning or planning or urban design. However, it needed to reside somewhere. So I'd like to get a sense, I think the committee would like to get a sense of what Housing and Human Services did, because there is a need for there to be competing resolutions. It would make more sense if we reviewed what they had to say and maybe augmented. But why don't you give us an overview of what was discussed there and what Housing and Human Services determined it would do?
Great. So the reason we were recommended specifically to Housing and Human Services was particularly to do with the Fort Fridge, because that's connected to the church campus and that feeds a lot of people in the community. So I think that was, they kind of were like mostly go to land use because we were recommended here, but that specifically to talk about the fridge and then the resource that provides to the community was to talk about Housing and Human Services. So the resolution is like we are asking for, so just a little background, the Fort Washington Collegiate Church, there's 4 collegiate churches. It's a corporation. They're across the island, and they've been around like 400 years. I am a member of the Fort Tryon Jewish Center, which meets on the campus. So that's my affiliation with the space. And they are trying to close this location uptown to make the rest of their locations more sustainable. They've had a lot of financial problems, which I guess we could get into. I don't know if that's relevant. So what we're asking for is that there was a vote about a month ago on April 7th to close the campus. And then there's a plan there's not been a lot of transparency, but from what we understand, there's a plan to try and seek a land lease to a developer and do like a long-term lease. And then a developer is gonna take over the space and develop it into something. Something that almost certainly will be less of a community gathering space than what's currently there. And less of a place that like is really uplifting the community. So we are asking when there's been not a lot of transparency in this decision-making process, and also not a lot of community input from the Washington Heights community, like the people that are voting on this mostly reside downtown or out of state. So we're asking the collegiate church overall to extend their closure deadline because they're saying that we're closing on June 30th, which is just over like a month away. So we're asking them to extend that deadline to give us more time to try and figure out some financially sustainable plan, and then also to come to the table and really be more transparent with us about their decision-making process and some of the budgetary problems, because there hasn't been what feels like a transparent conversation, so we haven't been able to negotiate in good faith.
Yeah, I went to the website and I printed out the statement that was issued, by Fort Washington Church, indicating that after the vote of the full consistory, that, with heavy hearts, they're, closing that campus, and everything will remain in operation through June 30th. But I guess the question is, and I was looking at the background of the collegiate church, but who would be speaking or negotiating with whom? Is it the leadership or the congregation at Fort Washington speaking with the full consistory? Because it's it sounds like you have this organization of 4 churches, and the overarching entity has decided, and actually this isn't new because it came up with the community board several years ago, there are financial issues, and so they're focusing on closing this one to keep the other 3 sustainable. But who would be discussing what with whom?
Good question. So on the church side, it's like the consistory, which is a body that has representatives from each of the 4 churches, potentially only 3 churches, and then a couple other, like a chair and a couple other people. And then they've been in communication with the board of the local Fort Washington branch collegiate church. But we are trying to build more of a coalition of the different stakeholders who meet there, who are going to be part of the negotiation moving forward. So we don't have like a formal group yet, but we're building this coalition now that's doing the press conference tomorrow, that there's people from, I'm from the synagogue that meets there. There's people from the orchestra and the choir and the fridge and all the different like stakeholder groups that are using that space as community to come together in coalition to be part of this negotiation.
And all of those stakeholders are working with, for lack of a better term, the board of Fort Washington Collegiate Church?
So far not. I think the board so far has been in a tricky position because, again, I'm not on the board and I can't speak for them, right? But they're have responsibilities to the larger collegiate organization as a board. So, I think until now, like a lot of things are in flux right after that vote. Until now, there hasn't been, I think, as far as I know, a lot of collaboration between like the board and the rest of the community stakeholders, as far as I know. But we're trying to change that now.
Jim?
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I have all sorts of comments, and pardon And one thing I want to do, and I presume the camera is pointed at me, so it turns out when I walked by there today, I saw this sign. Can you see it?
Not very well, though.
Oh, your keyboard is.
I'm working on it,
Can you describe what the sign says?
No, I'm gonna show what the sign says.
Navi Times, yes.
So someone is working with a real estate. Right, and, comment on a bunch of things.
I think we lost you for a minute, for a
Can you
second.
hear me now?
The internet is unstable.
Yes.
Okay.
Check.
Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna comment on a bunch of things. Number one, what I infer from that sign, and this is just my inference, but if you're working with a real estate company to lease the property, it means you're gonna lease the property as is. Maybe someone can lease the school, and so that implies to me that a compromise is always, well, compromises are always possible. But so that's one inference of that I made about this sign. Okay, now, a second comment I have has to do with the organization of the community board. They were at the Housing and Human Services Committee, and, oh, I see that, I'm talking to this microphone, that's the problem. So, that was an appropriate place, in terms of the refrigerator and the food and all that. But in fact, like I mentioned earlier, I'm the board parliamentarian, so there are actually 3 committees potentially involved, and if the 3 of us get together, we can make, in a sense, 3 times as much noise, or have 3 feet stomping or whatever. So, it's also us, even though it's not directly land use, because if the property changes hands or whatever, or they build something else there, it in fact is land use. And finally, because churches, I suppose, can be considered cultural institutions, that committee could get involved as well. So that's one piece of what I have to say. Another piece of what I have to say, because Wayne did print out the letter from your board, it sounds like your board has already thrown in the towel. They say they're closing the church. Now that's...
Well, they said what the consistory voted on.
That's not what I get from, but the letter signed by anyway. So, but the issue there, and you brought up the issue, and I'm so glad you did. The board of your church is conflicted because they seem to have some allegiance to the consistory, the church is large, and they also seem to have obviously some allegiance to their church itself. Now that conflict is very troublesome, and if it happened in the city government, bells would ring. So in fact, and again, this is my point of view, but again, I've been around and I understand these things because I've been around so long. The fact that you have a conflicted board, it really, from my point of view, and again, mine, is that they should be fighting to keep the church open. And the other 3 churches that apparently are in much better financial condition could actually reach out and help this church. That's, again, my point of view. So the sense I get, and I may be wrong, which is, because Wayne says it's the consistory that decided to close the church. But, from my sense of the letter that I read very quickly, your board has gone along with it. The board really should be representing the church. I mean, they can't fly in the face of the consistory, but they're the board of your church. So, and then one final thing, because again, I've been around so long. Your church has been an absolute pillar of this community for as long as I've been aware of its existence. There's not only its magnificent campus, and also it turns out the co-op that live in rents your sanctuary to have our annual meetings, and it's a magnificent building. And then of course the new building is quite excellent also. But another thing, I was a Boy Scout. In fact, I'm an Eagle Scout, and one of the best Boy Scout troops in the neighborhood. It was one of the envy of the other Boy Scout troops because they were so well organized. And I believe they had their own gym also, which is very nice. Was Troop 729, which is the church, the troop that was in your church, and it's also the address of the building, which is cute also. So for all these reasons, I in particular, and I have no power whatsoever in this situation. I really would like some kind of compromise so that the church and its works and that, having the church up here, that it remains. That's my point of view. And again, one of the things, and I think it's significant, and in fact, maybe someone will hire a lawyer at some point, the fact that you have a board that has a conflict of interest, that's problematic too, because, again, from my point of view, and again, maybe similar things happen in other churches. The Catholic Church decides to close the church. I don't know how much noise the pastor of the local church who works for them can make, but from the public point of view, in the public sphere, that would not be allowed. It would have to be, So I think I've said enough, and I hopefully made a strong point for my beliefs.
Thank you. I was just gonna add that, when we were.
Yell because the microphone's over here.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
No problem. I can definitely do that. At the Housing and Human Services Committee meeting, we had talked about potentially doing a letter in support of I think the group, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're hoping to get a little bit more time to try and negotiate a deal potentially with an organization that focuses on low-income housing or something like that. So my understanding was we weren't sure if the timing was gonna line up because our general board meeting, when we would need to vote on a resolution, is after this press conference, and so I guess time is of the essence. So I don't know if the letter would be done before then, but my understanding was we were going to be discussing it with Kathy, and certainly we're exploring how we might support for whatever.
Well, the press conference, I understand, tomorrow, so we won't be able to get.
Yeah.
But our meeting is before this deadline,
So that, your executive.
Right, so there's a press conference tomorrow, and then we had talked about the overall collegiate consistory is having their meeting on May 20th, where they're gonna officially dissolve the Fort Washington Collegiate Church and strip the board members of their boardship. So there is another kind of overarching gathering that's happening, that we have information that it's obviously not on their agenda to do so, but that they theoretically, by their bylaws, would be allowed to rescind their past vote at that meeting. So we're hoping to have made enough noise and get enough press and talk to enough elected officials and be able to hopefully influence the meeting on May 20th, and that you all have a meeting on May 19th. Maybe it's the executive meeting. I don't remember which meeting. There was a meeting on May 19th where someone thought something could get signed, which doesn't give a lot of leeway, but that was like one idea of there would be a quorum on May 19th to do some action.
Daniel?
I just have comments really, two things. I was looking at Navy Times, and I was saying that it's being rented out as a medical space, I guess.
Not at present.
On the corner, yeah.
Yeah, what the sign says medical space and others.
It is listed that way.
Right,
There's
but
not
it's
any
not
medical
currently
businesses.
being used.
Correct.
No, it's not. So, I don't know. Just seeing that it's just being wanting to use as a medical space, I guess is fine to me, because normally big hospitals, they take spaces like that, but the other comment was that I wonder if it would be worth talking to the people at NOMA.
NOMA.
Not NOMA, where their building is at, United Palace. Fiddleston?
But here's my question or my point, because I said this is not the first time something pertaining to Fort Washington Collegiate Church has been discussed at the community board and with the community board. Because I think years ago there was a discussion of potential partnership on a charter school and something prior to that. So the concept that there are financial issues, and it's not just Fort Washington Collegiate, there are a lot of churches in Manhattan, in the city, that are experiencing financial issues. I do not see the United Palace or NOMA or any of our local, CBOs being so flush with money that they can step in and, resolve that. So my question is, asking for more time makes a lot of sense, but don't we also need to be focusing on the idea, it sounds to me that there's a lot of talk going on, but it's not involving the actual Fort Washington Collegiate Church Board, and I think they need to be, or we need to hear what they have to say. We also need to get a sense of the dimension of the financial issues, and what are some of the things realistically that can be done to help.
Right. So I think, I mean, definitely it would be good. Yeah, I'm not on the church board, and I agree it would be great if they were here to speak on behalf of themselves. They have a lot of information that I don't have.
Well, that's my point. I don't
yeah.
know if it's been out, I know we have an outreach to them, and my
Yeah.
assumption is part of the group that would be speaking to us tonight would have included that, but that's, an assumption that is not now based in fact.
Right. I mean, I'm on the coalition, but yeah, from the synagogue side. And I guess I don't know if anyone is in the webinar who's from the board that happens to be here right now. So it's that two of our main people are actually out of town, who are the church people. But yeah, in terms of, I mean, your point about the finances is exactly one of the points we're trying to make, which is that, from what I understand, the local board of the Collegiate Church has come up with like a different lower budget than what the collegiate consistory overall is. Like, they're saying we need $800K to run the building. Like, if you can't raise $800K in partner rent, then the building won't be sustainable, whatever. That's the number that they've given. They haven't apparently given the board transparency about where that number comes from, nor have they received from the board like, we actually come up with this alternate number, we've cut our budget in certain ways. So like, because there hasn't been transparency in the finances, we don't feel like they've come to the table to really listen to what our community needs and like what we think would be good solutions. That's what we're asking for, is like, listen to this budget proposal that we have, like, look at these other ways that we're trying to make this work, instead of just telling us that this is the budget it needs to be from afar and then not listening.
Let me let Tracy speak first, we'll come back to you. Tracy?
And then me, then Danny.
Little bit confused about two different points. The first point is, I guess, I hear this issue, but what is being asked of the land use committee other than, is it just for us to help brainstorm about things that can be done? Because oftentimes when there's issues with private buildings, what we hear on land use is that private buildings, that the ownership is able to do whatever they want with it. And we have limited, control about what private ownership does unless they're actually in violation of the law.
Mm-hmm.
And it does, therefore, the question is this an appropriate conversation for land use, in the sense of like, I guess I'm sort of saying is like, this is a big issue and I think it's important, but what is the ask? Are we writing a resolution? Are we helping them brainstorm about how to come up with finances? But what it sounds like is a private building doing what it wants with the private building that members of the public want more information on. But is that appropriate for our committee? And it might be, but I don't understand.
Well, Tracy, that's sort of what I began with. I pointed, and I believe you were at the general meeting via Zoom. So on a number of occasions, the stakeholders were referred to the land use committee, and Jim Berlin even emailed me during that meeting that they'll be coming because he didn't see that I was there. But as I pointed out on the side, that there isn't a zoning or land use or discretionary action involved, but there needed to be a committee where it could be discussed in more detail than you can at the general meeting. So it was referred to land use. I did not know that it was also going to Housing and Human Services, because then perhaps I would not have also included it on land use. But I think what we're doing now is land use would want to touch base with Housing and Human Services to see what is the resolution it passed, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. What the community board as a whole is going to be asked to do is to support the position of asking for there to be more time for the church and the local stakeholders to come up with a realistic plan to address the financial issues. So it's not a land use issue at all. It is a ultimately a community and a community board issue.
Stacy,
I
do
think
you
it's just
have a
discussion
second
and
one?
brainstorming. I just want to be clear because I'm losing the thread. This isn't accusatory. This is just, you know,
Yeah.
left side, right side of brain style. What the
Yeah,
goal is.
and you're basically saying what I pointed out. It's not really, but you know, this is a venue at which it can be discussed clearly in more detail and more time than we could at the general meeting. And I think Jim was next.
Have you not spoken
I
yet?
haven't spoken
Okay,
yet.
then he goes first and then I go.
Um,
So let's see if I
Hi,
can-
Malia. So the ask is for time, but that includes, does time mean funding the congregation, the operations of the church itself during that time? Is that what time means?
I think that the church has some additional funds that would extend them past the June 30th deadline. There was a meeting with the collegiate consistory people, which is actually on YouTube. If you want to see it, it was live streamed, unless they've taken it down. They took it off Facebook. And someone brought up, they said, we're closing on June 30th because of these finances. And someone brought up, we actually, as this local church, have budget to operate past that date. Why are you closing us before we actually are running out of money? And they didn't really give an answer. So I'm not sure how far that money goes, but that was brought up, and the collegiate was like, well, we've decided on this day. So, but that's a good point.
Why that day?
We don't know.
Because it's the end of the fiscal year for the collegiate churches, right?
That's probably why.
Yeah.
I don't know. Someone knows.
And I guess I'm a little bit confused about what folks are asking for in terms of, is it to keep the church congregation open, or is it to keep the campus open on some level for community, etc.?
Great question. I'm wondering, I have the resolution in front of me. I can either read it or send it to you guys or do neither, but let me know if one of those things would be helpful. I would say internally we have a 3-tiered vision, which is ideally, the collegiate church, again, I'm not a church member myself, but the collegiate church offers Fort Washington offers like a really specific and special type of church experience uptown that isn't available in a lot of other places. So that's offering a lot to the community. So ideally, kind of keeping things, rescind the decision to close the congregation. So keep the congregation open and also give the congregation the support that it needs and our coalition the support that it needs to find the financial solutions that are necessary. And then everything kind of, things won't stay the same, but yeah, the church, the congregation stays open and the campus stays open to the community and we find financial solutions. Kind of like second tier after that is if they aren't willing to to keep the congregation open, that the congregation somehow will then become independent. And our second ask is then to keep the campus open. So even if the church doesn't want to support a congregation in that space, like as the owners of that land, to allow us the time to find other financial solutions so that we can keep that space open to the community, to all like the critical functions that it's serving. And then I guess lastly, if they refuse all of that and we're not able to bring them to negotiation in any way, that if there is a redevelopment of that space, that it's like mission aligned and it's affordable housing, and that also it's going to they'll put in that space the community gathering space on like the lower floors or something, so that we can keep that space open to community, because there's not so many spaces where like the orchestra can meet and like provide what it provides to the community. So those are kind of our tiers.
Just for follow-up then. I'm a little bit confused about what was I going to ask? From everything I've read and heard publicly, the focus has been on closing the church congregation. I don't necessarily get the sense that the campus writ large is closed. I mean, obviously there's going to be some period of transition, but that's not the impression that I get. necessarily. And to your point about development, my understanding is that the proposal that the local board last made was a proposal that was rejected by the Greater Collegiate Board, was to redevelop the space. And so I guess I'm confused, are we trying to retain the plot of the parcel with the grass and the garden, everything as is, or are we trying to save the church congregation through a development project that might actually raise the block? I'm just a little confused where it seems like there's multiple agendas here that I'm not sure what's the priority.
Yeah. I feel like, I mean, it's a good question. I think what we're trying to build, I mean, you're setting those up in opposition to each other. Either we leave it open for the community, or the church can stay as a congregation with a redevelopment, and we're trying to not set up those in opposition to each other, that we can all win here. So in coalition, right? So the church can hopefully continue to meet as a congregation, and there's space for the community groups. And that's the goal. And like whatever it takes to maintain that as a place where that can happen is like what we want to do. So like ideally we would like again, it's like a gorgeous space, and there's a garden, which is so important to the community. Like we know the like economic and health benefits of having a local garden. And like it's an accessible space. It just had a $10 million renovation like 10 years ago. So like it's a beautiful space. It's currently underutilized.
It was actually like 26.
26 million?
Yeah.
Why did I think it was 10? Great, yeah. So it's such an expensive renovation. Why would we tear down the building now? I mean, also there's so many empty plots around Washington Heights that people, you know, like the corner of 181 and Broadway, there's like 187 and St. Nick, like there's all these empty plots. So like once you're like leasing it to a developer, like who knows what's gonna happen. So we ideally, ideally we want to keep the space as is and figure out a way to make the financial realities possible. And then everyone can continue to meet there, the groups and the congregation, whether they're affiliated with collegiate or they've become independent.
Sure.
Jim?
Okay.
Oh, is it, yeah, Jim, then Danny?
Right, this is before I've read the stuff you sent us.
Yeah, that's not good.
Oh, well, okay. There are a bunch of issues. Number one, although we have a meeting on the 19th, it turns out this board can speak whenever it wants to, because the chair of our board can speak for the board at any point. So if we and the other committees decided on what we as a board wanted to say tomorrow, and Kathy chose to do so, she could speak for the board, and we would just ratify what she said. And basically, she can even create resolutions on behalf of the board. So we can get something out way before the 20th. That's number one. Number two, this sort of addresses what Tracy's concern, and again, you know, some of it sort of has to do with what committee should have the jurisdiction. Churches are, you know, in a sense, private, you know, in fact, you know, they are private entities, but on the other hand, insofar as they run programs that benefit the entire community, their actions are not all that private. So, and again, I understand Tracy's point that this may be a more appropriate, you know, issue for another committee to talk on, but it's certainly an issue that the community board has every right to speak about. So that's something there. Another thing is, yes, it's the end of the fiscal year, but, you know, if they want to do something at the beginning of the following fiscal year, they can do it. So, you know, that could be a game that someone is playing. Now, the other point, and you know, it was addressed pretty well, but I'm trying to, you know, tease it out a little bit more. If the campus stays in operation the way it is, the congregation would continue, and all of these other groups would still rent space. I mean, conceivably, and this might be part of a compromise, they'll pay a little more or whatever. So there's that. And you know, the campus staying intact, as you pointed out, and I think I spoke very strongly about it, would be the ideal, because it's such a magnificent space in terms of architecture and the garden and the lawns and, you know, more so what it does for the community. Now, what has happened at other sites in the district, and I think in one or two cases congregations were actually scammed, but in other cases it's worked right, is a developer buys the property, and then as part of their development of the property, they create a space for the congregation or a congregation. In the case of what was happened in this district, there were congregations that did not have some consistory, you know, on top of them, they just decided for themselves. But they got a space in the new building for their worship and for their other functions. Technically, it's treated as a condo, so that, you know, the ownership is, you know, sort of divided or whatever. But the point is, that would allow the congregation to continue, or a congregation to continue. However, the physical space would no longer be there. This would end up looking like some nondescript office building or whatever, who knows. And the other thing we should keep in mind, which is land use, is we have two huge potential development sites within a block, a big block, and nothing is happening with them. And one of them is the site of the former Coliseum. I just walked by there. It's very, soon it will be a forest. It's very nice. They should get rid of the concrete and throw in dirt there, and we could have a forest.
Grow tomatoes.
Across the street is the building where the McDonald's is, which housed what was originally the Harlem Savings Bank. In fact, that's why they have the thing covered, because it's actually in stone on top. And that's now the Apple Bank, and it moved to rental space down the block somewhere. So that building is vacant too, and it's also available for development. And I'm sure that's what they would like to do. But so far, no one has taken them up on them. And just to the south of the Apple Bank is that, you know, one-story Citibank building that, you know, something can be done with that space also. And you know, they could move to a different space also. So there are these two huge development sites, and they're actually right across the street from one another. Although they do have different zoning, as Wayne is certainly aware. But nothing has happened with them, so that, you know, whether a developer would want to develop something, you know, a block away on 181st Street in Fort Washington is another story. On the other hand, it's on top of a hill, so if you built a tower,
It's a different
it would have
neighborhood,
a wonderful view. And they're always like tall things, so people can pay a lot of money for the apartments up in the air. I live on the 11th floor, by the way.
So, I think Daniel was next.
Yeah, I was just commenting on like what I said earlier a little bit. One of the reasons why I mentioned Mike was because I think at like some point they were like trying to figure out like what to do with like their space and like their building, and they came to like Parks and Cultural Affairs a couple of times, and I think like the way that they have it set up is kind of like, I don't know, it works for them. And I know
Where
that
is this?
United Palace.
Oh, United Palace.
Yeah, so like I would think that even though Mike might not have the financial, but he might be able to at least like help and like in a sense of like being able to give some kind of like, I don't know, advice or something like that.
Oh, he could definitely do that, and I'm sure he'd be willing to do that. And
Right, yeah, because it's like
it benefits the neighborhood, so of course, you know.
that like,
Yeah.
because like let's say like United Palace, like that space, like it has an auditorium and it's a really big auditorium, but then on top of that they have the studio spaces, they have like the Plazas de las Americas like right there as well too. They have like little gallery spaces inside and
Studios.
studios, and they seem to make it work in there some way, somehow. I don't know, but and I would think that he might know a thing or two or something like that on being able to like run old churches, or I don't know.
I saw online some of the discussion, they pointed to Rocky Mountain Church or something that I think was another Upper Manhattan.
That's the one I was
Side.
talking about.
Yeah, so I saw a lot of talk about that. I just wanna say I found a draft, and so if I could read you the 3 resolved points, just to kind of like,
This is the Housing and Human Services?
yes.
Sure.
It's
And Rocky
it's a
Mount
draft.
Baptist Church is in fact a project that this committee and this board is very familiar with.
So the resolution does not mention that, but in some of the conversations that I've seen online about the church and the press conference tomorrow, that's been an example that people have given us a potential result. So the 3 resolved points are, we call on the consistory of the Collegiate Church, private developers, and community organizations to 1, continue to operate and support its operations at Fort Washington Collegiate through December 31st, 2025. provide meaningful financial resources and support to assist FWCC in developing and executing a long-term sustainability plan. And finally, actively and meaningfully engage with community stakeholders, including current and prospective FWCC campus partners and renters, Community Board 12, elected officials, and surrounding community to leverage existing networks, resources, and support to ensure the ongoing financial security, operations, and success of FWCC.
Is there punctuation in that?
And its role as a cornerstone of the community.
That's all of them?
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
You have really good lungs, don't you?
Yeah, I do,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. So, I would say, we should get a copy of that, review it, coordinate with Kathy, or, I mean, it could just, go as is. But clearly from this discussion, there are a lot of potential options. There's also a lot of information that we don't have, and it's a lot of information that I guess any number of people do not have. So one of the things that I think the community board would be interested in is, getting some more, accurate information, so we are not guessing at or making assumptions about what's going on. And that's something, I don't know if anyone has a connection or point person with the Collegiate Church board, the website. I mean, it's just a general email, but I think if, the board chair or committee member were to outreach to them, that would be a way of doing it, because I don't know if we just ask the district manager to do that with all the things he's juggling, if we'd get the response in time. But-
I know that the collegiate board, the Fort Washington board, is working on like a official document of like their narrative of what's been going on.
Yeah.
So I think that would provide.
And I'm not looking at dueling narratives, I'm just looking at some that we can speak to directly, because through this discussion, we're saying there are a lot of questions that we're asking, and we're not in a position to answer them, but frankly, neither are you, because you're not, on the board. And as we talked about, Rocky Mount Baptist Church is that's one potential, outcome. Holy Trinity, that's further up in Inwood, is another potential outcome.
The one on the rock?
Yeah, the one on the rock where one of the historic buildings is retained, another building, and so there are a number of things that can happen, and the question is, what are people thinking about? As Chris mentioned, are people saying that they are fighting for the congregation that we're not speaking to, for the congregation to stay and to continue to operate there? Are they fighting for physically the buildings and the grounds to remain and perhaps have some other use? I mean, so there are a lot of questions, and there are a lot of, legitimate possibilities. So I think supporting the idea of there being, more time to talk and think this through makes sense, but I also know that we need to be talking and thinking with the right people and with accurate information.
Agreed.
Your analysis, Wayne, is excellent, and I totally agree with you. So I think, and since you are our chair and the subcommittee already produced resolutions, ideally you could reach out, and maybe I'll try to do the same for myself tomorrow, to reach out to Kathy, because she is the key. She can talk to all the right people, and she's plenty smart enough to figure out what we as a board ought to be doing and probably would like to do.
Sure.
And again, we want probably our voice to be heard significantly before the May 20th meeting, where there will be a decision made, so that it will have proper effect.
Absolutely. And do you have an actual draft of the resolution? If you could email that to me, not that we're gonna do anything now, I can have an intelligent conversation with Kathy.
Sure.
So, thank you, but before I say thank you to you, Amelia, is there any other attendee, who is here to discuss the Fort Washington Collegiate Church? If not, I would say, thank you. And we have a couple of other agenda items,
Sorry, can I just make sure I understand what's that? Sorry. So you, Chair, we're going to speak with Kathy and
Kathy is our board chair.
Okay, okay. To reach out, but then to get more information from the people that have it. But that also you're working on
Well,
a letter or
no,
something.
what Jim explained is one of the options at any community board's discretion is for the board chair to act on behalf of the board, but then that action must be ratified at the general meeting. So the executive committee also has that ability, but the executive committee does not meet until the 19th. So the board chair could decide to issue a letter this week. So in speaking with her tomorrow, I could say that, that's why I asked for a copy of the resolution that Housing and Human Services, that, it makes sense for her to act sooner to issue something, asking for the things that were outlined, by the committee and supported in principle by the land use committee, so that, we get our position on record sooner.
Ah, amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So the next two items are actually for committee discussion, but let me also share with you that Catherine and I had a Zoom meeting earlier today with Madison from EDC, and we were talking about the Inwood rezoning points of commitment and the update meeting that we've been talking about for a couple months. And, it's May. And in February, when we were talking about this, we said, oh, we have plenty of time. And at this juncture, we really don't have plenty of time, because if we're going to do this in June, there's limited time for, planning, getting a venue and all that. So the thought was, with the questions that have been generated thus far, which is like only 11, although there are a couple that need a little clarification, so we may be at 13, that EDC would come to the land use committee in June and clarify some of the questions that we raised about the level of detail on schedules and funding and the utility as a tool for use. And then in September, when presumably other, what? Yeah,
that's the old one,
yeah, other committee chairs would have, either raised whatever questions they might have about the commitments that pertain to their committee, or have advised Catherine, who's gonna give them a deadline, that they have no questions. There'd be the meeting scheduled with EDC and clearly HPD, because there are a lot of housing issues. That would be in September at a location in Inwood, like a public hearing to address that. And then moving forward from there, as we discussed with, I think, EDC and city planning, like in February, so the committee structure would be the vehicle by which further updates would happen. So for transportation-related things, it would go to, TNT. We would not, put land use in the position where we are trying to organize all of the committees and all of the agencies. So just looking at the item number 3, which is, finalization of our questions concerning the Inwood rezoning, I shared with everyone via email what was received thus far. And it's these 11, and there were 2 others that are in there that were provided, but it wasn't clear to me how they actually related to the 39 points of agreement. Not that they shouldn't be provided to the appropriate committee for follow-up, and I think Housing and Human Services already addressed one of them, but is there, or are there questions, comments, other than those that I've, pulled together from the emails and put in this one document on the Inwood rezoning, and just to go, not through each of them, but we talked about last time and we summarized, the timelines are very general and we want or need more information. There are a lot of commitments where it says no new funding is required. And what does that mean? Does that mean that every one of those housing projects, every one of those, does that mean that Mayor Adams and Governor Hochul have all of the money allocated? If not, what do you really mean? there was a pilot program that was supposed to be initiated through UMES. Is UMES still supporting that? There's something else about timelines for evaluating bike lanes. That's another schedule related. There is discussion of, and we've talked about this over the years, affordable housing on public land. What actions have been taken or are being taken to further that? Not for a specific project, but if that's the concept, and actually, if I recall, in the state of the city, that was one of the things that Mayor Adams, pointed out that he was charging the agencies with, was like identifying public land, what steps have been taken. So it's like the broad brush things like that, we wanna know, what are you doing? What's the actual schedule? What steps are being taken? Questions, comments, grunts?
Yeah. Can I say one thing about this, that protected bike lane? I know I saw a meeting not too long ago.
Not specifically about
Yeah.
that, but are there additional things that we want to have EDC pull in the appropriate agency to address? Because
I don't know if you got to see that thing that I did, and I read all of them, and I looked through all that stuff, and it did suck that a lot of those the updates, just to try to even find any resolutions in any other meetings is just
yeah, but see, that shouldn't be our job, that's my
Yeah.
point. The other committee chairs, and Catherine gave everyone at the last executive committee this document
Mhm.
and asked the committee chairs to provide their comments.
and that was one of my things. When I did it, I was just you know what, let me just see what is it that all of these are talking about. And it is kind of one of those things where just if I can find the right person to ask these 2 or 3 simple questions, it would make that list more complete. But looking through the parks, most of 75% of the parks is quite possibly done and all
Yeah,
that stuff.
and you, I mean, that was a great review that you did, going through all of the parks commitments. It's all except 2
Yeah,
are done.
yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know why, we can't get parks to basically do what you did, and maybe they will. But the point is, that's what we need. I mean, we're looking at this because the zoning is done, and we're sort of looking at the utility of this tracker as a tool, and some of the, the detail it provides or lack of detail that it provides. But on specific projects and things like that, we've got lots of committees that should be interested in what's happening with subways and what's happening with parks and what's happening with waterfronts and,
Yeah, and just even looking at that thing, it would have been,
Yeah, you
it
call it
would
up.
be great if it was just 5 or 6 was just assigned to a person and just kind of do the research. But then again, it does suck that you have to do a little bit of the extra legwork to then get these guys to be hey, look at what's happening over here, why
yeah,
isn't
well,
this thing?
we're not going to do.
And this is one of the reasons why I decided to actually do the work, because it's if we can do it, why can't you?
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
Right, but I guess I want to focus on, because
Yeah.
this is what we need, and this is what's kind of holding us up and pushing the June to September is, these 11 questions EDC has, I shared it with them, and they're very happy to get a sense of, what we're focusing on. And that's the issue. They want to know what we're focusing on, because it's not something where EDC is going to answer. EDC has to pull in the appropriate agencies so they can address it. So that's why I say, from our perspective, if there are other questions or general points that relate to the 39 commitments or 39 pages of commitments, we should add it to that so that EDC can know which agencies to pull in. OC, I see your hand.
Yeah, without being too specific about, particular issue, I think that EDC should come back to us not just with the answers to the specific questions we are forwarding to them, but also be more forthcoming in terms of the larger projects and what's the timeline to get them to completion. or which projects are not going to happen at all, or any of those, to give us more indication what's going on. I don't think that it is fair to ask us, not you, Wayne, but in general, the work that we are doing is to sort through the various projects and find out, hey, you didn't answer on this, can you give us answer on that? No, they should really come to us on a regular basis, and by that I mean maybe every 6 months. I'm not saying every month. And come back to us with concrete information on the big items, or maybe I should say all the items, I'm not really sure, that give us some sort of a timeline. Where do we stand on the variety of projects that they have information about? Not all the 39. Don't give us a laundry list and just, you understand where I'm coming from?
I understand what you're saying, but I don't fully agree. I think part of the issue is, for years, and I do mean for years, in land use, we have raised with the full board that these commitments are not limited to the land use committee. They cut across the entire board. They are of interest to multiple committees. And each committee, and it's not, hard for a committee to look at, because we do this every year when we're looking at budget priorities. We have much more detail. It's not hard for a committee to look at a dozen commitments, for example, on, small business services, and to do exactly what you've said. If there are particular large ones of interest, to say to EDC that we want you to bring in, or to reach out to SBS directly at our meeting, and not next month, but maybe in 2 months, so they have time to prepare an update on what's going on, with the small business incubator, or give us a comprehensive update on the dozen projects. There is nothing that prevents each committee from looking at their area and saying, these are the ones that we're particularly interested in. Come to us, with some comments on that. Or there are a dozen, or there are 20 of them. Let us know what's the status of each. That is not hard. And as you said, if they do that on a quarterly basis, that will be something that is quite manageable. So I don't think we should just say to EDC, come to us with all that, because we're all intelligent people. We have the ability to say, these are the 3 projects that are happening now, or these are the 3 projects that are of real concern at the moment. And the others we know are not going to happen, this year, but we need to know what's happening with X, Y, Z, and here are the reasons why. And there's nothing prevented us from doing that. I mean, us, the 50 of us, and that's what really needs to happen.
I do not disagree with you, but since we us here, the land use committee already went through, all the projects. I think that if other committees, it's up to other committees to ask questions if they have any. But since we already went through all of them, might as well gonna send those questions to EDC, and they come back to us with answers, because we already read all of them. But I'm just saying, this has to be an ongoing communication, and I think that I don't know for a fact, but I don't think that EDC is calling the office or you, hey, we have some update on, let's say, the sanitation garage. We want to come to land use and have a 10 minutes talk about that, for example.
And I think I saw 3 hands, but just to go back to what we discussed several months ago, that's exactly what we're asking for. We're asking for ongoing dialogue. And as we also discussed then, just to reiterate it, we talked about having this multi-agency update, because we haven't had something like that since the ELIZA was in process. But we also said, moving forward from this, town hall, the committee structure provides opportunities each and every month for city agencies to interact, and there's nothing preventing Housing and Human Services, Traffic and Transportation, Parks and Culture, Small Business Services from, addressing their areas of interest. I don't remember who was it. I know it was Jim, Indiana, and Daniel, but I don't remember what the order is.
It's just quick, I just wanted to say about the commitments. It does get tricky because like inside of those commitments, then it goes into like HPD, cloth, something, like 3 or 4 different organizations, so that's just like something that I wanted to mention, and that for when like someone is like going in there and like actually like reading these questions and like looking back and seeing what the commitment is, and that's like the tricky part too, because it's not only like, okay, like EDC is gonna have to like hit up like 3 different people.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think it would be a great idea if like everyone just like at least like once a month or once every quarter, whatever, just kind of just like have already like an email with like all these agencies, like, hey, like these are the 12 commitments that we did, like these are the people that are involved in it, like what's up with these projects? Are these projects happening? Have you started? Have you ended? I don't know.
Yeah.
Mouth shut.
I think it's great to invite, multiple committees or have EDC reach out and coordinate with other city agencies. I didn't submit any questions because I thought we were focusing on like some of the land use ones, but I think bigger picture.
I don't think there are any land use ones.
Okay, well, like some of the ones about like develop this or, specific projects, but I think one of the big overarching questions that I have that I think would be great to hear at the June meeting, because it's before the city budget passes. I would like to know, for example, the proposal that says continue to provide robust free legal representation to tenants. What I would wanna make sure is that the funding that is allocated, that like we have a commitment that, okay, if it's a citywide initiative, that we're counting towards this.
Is that one where it says no new funding is required?
Yes.
But if you look at question number 2, it's like clarify what is meant by no new
Yes.
funding is required
For sure.
in connection with, in general, because does it mean that each commitment is fully funded and is proceeding? That goes across, there are like so many of them where that's the question.
Yes.
It's too vague.
100%. I think I would make it even a little bit more specific by saying, like, what percentage of the funding has been like allocated towards organizations that are providing those services in Inwood, right? Because
Well, Washington
What-
Heights and Inwood.
yeah, so I think my concern is like, they can say, oh, we have like this housing court initiative and we've got this, and they're citywide initiatives, but I would maybe push for
Yeah, we
a
can-
little bit more of a.
What percent of fund is
Commitment.
allocated to CBOs and CD12?
Yeah. And then the other thing was, a lot of those same questions were for the Small Business Services initiatives,
Mhm.
like the legal services for local businesses and the development of affordable space for local small business, just trying to get like specific quantities or percentages, or even just which funding source are you thinking of whenever you say this has already been addressed. It would be good to know which funding stream they're referring to.
Which funding streams?
The other thing too that comes to mind is I used to work in legal services, and right now my focus is immigration, and a lot of the federal funding for certain legal services is being cut or very highly threatened. And so if we're counting on like any kind of state funding or federal funding that somehow trickles down to these initiatives, then I again would want to push for a commitment to Inwood, because they've already committed to funding services. So before they decide how the rest of the city gets the money, I would want to make sure that they honor the Inwood commitments.
And it was Jim, then I see Tracy.
This is basically a comment, and once again, I want to compliment Wayne and everyone else, because I think this has to be pursued. I think every one of these things can be assigned as one of our actual committees, and it, because of the way this board works and ought to work, the committees, and I'm sure they'll be more than willing to do it, should pursue their little corner. And this can all be, of course, coordinated by our chair, but, So I think basically, based upon what I just heard in the last 10 minutes or so, I think we're headed in the right direction. And again, you know, we need specificity, absolutely.
Yeah, Tracy, you had your hand up, but you took it down.
Piggyback on what Jim said, this is land use. The entire individual committees are supposed to go through this for their interests. And everything, Indiana, you just said, I think is wicked important and we should ask about it. But that's actually for those other committees to ask about, and this should be focused on land use. And I'm saying this again in terms of like to be respectful of all of our time, because this time should only be for the land use points of actions. And then if it's not, then in our individual, community board member hat, we could bring that up in the general, but I think we're going outside of our scope.
Well, unfortunately, land use has developed the reputation over the years of being one of the workhorses of the community board. But what you're saying, Tracy, is exactly in line with, my initial comments is, over the years, not just this year, but over the years, going back to, before we even moved to this space, when we were in, the other space, I've pointed out to the full board that these commitments are not land use commitments. And even the way it's structured, it's clear they're not land use commitments. They address multiple committees of the board, and each committee should be looking at the list and asking their questions. And at last month's executive committee meeting, Catherine circulated to the board chairs the same, PDF that we are looking at, and asked them to provide their comments. I have to check and see what deadline she gave them, but I reiterated to her today, and that's one of the reasons why, we're looking at, September for this bigger meeting, because at this juncture, we don't have their input. So you're absolutely right, we don't know what their priorities, their concerns are. They need to articulate them. We can certainly be the focus of getting all of them and sending them to EDC, but we can't make them up for them.
Let's talk. This is a yes, and can I jump in for 1 sec?
Sure.
I do think that we need to keep this lens on about time and topic and so forth and so on. This is like not just for us, it's like for everyone, in the sense that like I'm going to use my own personal thing. Like sometimes I can't attend in person because we go so far afield and I got to get my homeboy to bed by a particular time. Now that's my individual issue and I'm going to deal with that with my girlfriend Martell and my attendance and stuff. But I do think that it does lend itself to a larger
You can make
issue
an assistant chair.
about just to be mindful of time. And on that note, let me go make sure he hasn't drowned in the bath. Okay.
Good idea.
Don't say that publicly. Anything else on item 3? Because item 4 is similar. This is something where we decided, I have so many papers out here that I'm showing. We decided that it would make sense for us to develop a list of general questions that we would use when we're evaluating, development proposals or renovation proposals, and we were going to send to OC by a certain deadline questions. And what I circulated and printed on 2-sided paper for the first time ever is, I think there were, these are the comments that I've seen come through. And I haven't gone through to, wordsmith them or make it in one comprehensive list, but I just want to say this is what we have thus far. Is there anything else?
I don't know of anything else, but again, I want to compliment everyone. Obviously, these 3 separate lists have to be merged in some ways with a consistent list. But I'm impressed by the thoughtfulness I've seen in what I just read. I didn't have the opportunity, I didn't have any ideas, which is why I didn't participate, but
You always have ideas, stop it.
well, maybe not on this, but the point is that, again, I compliment all of these. You know, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, and of course, you know, the magnificence of it is that we're volunteers.
And our salary is gonna be increased from 0 to twice that.
I used to tell the board when I was chair that I got paid twice as much.
So, OC, I see your hand, I was gonna ask you a question.
Yeah, I think we should look at that document as a live document, that, you know, we're going to continue to work on that as needed. I mean, maybe some things will need to be dropped, others will be add on depending on, you know. But
Yeah.
I think it's a nice base to send to developers so they can answer questions without us asking.
Yeah,
You know,
and it's not
meaning-
just developers, because if you look at the last 3 projects we looked at,
Mhm.
the most recent one was the building here on 168th and Broadway, which is the City of New York Department of Health and DDC. Prior to that, it was Columbia Medical with the expansion of the R&D complex next to the nurses' building. And the one prior to that was the work at the Armory, which is another DDC. So it's not just developers, as I pointed out, you know, I think in an email to Vivian, it's any building project, you know, we're looking at.
Yep.
And actually, last month that we had the Hispanic Society, and we know they're coming back to us in September with an actual development that we will, you know, be asked to do a resolution on because they need to go to LPC. So it's not just development, you know, developers, it's like
Right.
any client coming before us with a
Mhm.
renovation or development project.
Yep.
So what I was thinking of doing, yeah, let me just, what I was thinking of doing, and I agree, it should be a live document, is, you know, some of these questions can be clustered. Some are, you know, general, some relate to energy efficiency, some relate to zoning, and we might take this and structure it so it's in categories.
Okay.
I wonder if it would be a good idea to like make it into like a Google form and then like use that as like the live document and have that as a link to be able to send to whomever, whenever. And my question was more about like, when are we gonna send this like to these developers and all that stuff? But then I'm just like thinking, I'm like, how are we even gonna send this? Are we just gonna send them an email? Like, can we just send them like a Google form and just have them,
Well, you know,
you know, look through it?
well, you know, to some extent, you know, we're a little ahead of ourselves, but if, for example, you know, we got the email and DDC wanted to come to present to us on the health center.
Mm-hmm.
We could, you know, say we're scheduling for XYZ date, and here are some generic questions we typically ask, so you could be prepared to answer them. Or we could say that, you know, here are some generic questions, but based upon the nature of your project, we want you to focus on blah, 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 blah.
Okay.
So I mean, I would think it depends on what we're looking at.
Sure. Okay.
First, the most important question, where do I get a lapel pin like that?
You, I think, have to be a CCNY alumni.
I be a CCNI.
Reach out to the Alumni Association and.
Do that.
Have you donated lately?
Well, that's a
I
good.
donate to the school, but not the alumni.
We'll do the Alumni Association.
Well, anyway.
It's tax
so-
deductible, come on.
Right. Anyway, I agree, you know, and, you know, Danny now does too. We should make this document, once it's in nice shape, available, and when developers show up, as a courtesy to them, you know, like Wayne said, you know, these are the sorts of questions you might be asked. Now, I don't think we want written answers, because then we.
No, they'd be prepared to discuss it.
Right, exactly, and then that way, and the beauty of that, because sometimes we see this, and when you have a discussion with someone, you can't just ask questions out of the blue, because they're gonna say, I'm not prepared. I'll tell you next time, and God, don't hold your breath, you know, but.
Or they legitimately might not be prepared.
Yes, there's also good faith, yes, that's also possible, but this way, they can't use that excuse, you know, did you not see?
Well, it's not even necessarily using, I mean, one of the questions I asked after the fact with the health center is like, you know, when it was built, was it built before or after the hospital, and was that site specifically picked because of proximity? Now, that's something that did get back to me, so I mean, we're being cynical, but every time I've asked a question, I've gotten answers and I've shared them with you, but that was something.
They've been very good.
Yeah, that was something where, had I asked it before, they could have given some more background on it, because the location of that was in fact picked because of its proximity to the hospital, and the hospital was there first. Heidi, then back to you.
I mean, can't we just throw up the questions on the website for the board? And be like, before you come and present to us, please refer to our website to see the types of things that we.
You know, we can, but for example, I find that, for example, with our general meetings, at least sending me or sending board members an email saying, these are the materials to review for the meeting, is different than saying, go to Airtable, it's there somewhere. I have no problem, you know, particularly if it's a standard document, you know, emailing that to whomever we're coming, because we're gonna confirm with them that they're coming, take a look at this, as opposed to, well, go to our website and you'll find it somewhere. Because what I often find is sometimes you find it difficulty finding the damn thing on the website.
That website is hard to
Yeah.
navigate through, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like, instead of being like, are we sending a Google Doc, it's just like, here it lives on this link,
Yeah,
here's this link.
If it's on the site,
You know.
we can include the link in the email, and, you know, but I said, to me, it's a little more helpful to give them the link than say to go to our website and find it, because sometimes even for us to go there all the time, it's hard to find stuff.
I was say, if we can still add a question, then I will try and drop something about accessibility. And not just meeting-based accessibility standards, but like phrasing it as like,
I
how are
can't
you going
believe
to
we missed that.
How are you going to exceed accessibility? Or something about maybe like even universal design, you know.
Mm-hmm.
ADA
Oh,
design,
absolutely,
anything like that.
absolutely.
True.
Absolutely send those questions.
I just wanted to say that I think it would be great that if they can also at least like write a short form of some kind of answer, so then like later on, like possibly someone needs to like reference it in like in the minutes or something like that, or just to have as a general, like, oh, they gave us a very detailed answer, and like even though there's already a discussion somewhere online, like if someone wants to read it or something, like here it is, like this is like what they gave us.
Yeah.
And at least it being like as official can get. you
Yeah,
know, from
well, I
their
mean,
mouth.
when we ask the questions via email, we get those responses via email, they said, I shared them.
Yeah.
So we have that, and I think I always ask for, when they do the presentations, to send us the presentation, because in many instances, the information that we're referencing was given to us in the PowerPoint, and if we have it, and particularly like when I'm drafting resolutions or when I was doing minutes, I say, well, what did they actually say? I can actually go back to their document and reference it.
Yeah, I think that's like super helpful, and the way that you set it up is actually good.
Anything further? I can't imagine that we didn't hit accessibility.
That's shocking. You just would be furious.
Was that a hand?
That was
or-
a
That was a thumbs up?
Is there anything about transportation?
Well,
Because I know some of the projects, like part of the deal ends up being like, we're gonna do some renovations to the subway stop or
Well,
add an elevator. or
that's-
something
I think we'd wanna make that more general, because not every project is near transportation, but is there some enhancement to community infrastructure?
Public transportation.
Well, not necessarily public transportation, are they upgrading a park, for example?
Good point.
It may not be near, the subway, but they could be upgrading a park.
A public space or something like that.
Exactly.
Like the Radio Hotel, that they have open to the public space in the back.
So they claim.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Public.
It doesn't feel so public, yeah, but it's just like, you go in there, they're supposed to have, I think they have a sign there, and it's just like kind of
I
like,
think the last time we discussed that,
Yeah.
someone pointed out the sign is there.
yeah.
And, you know, it is open to, the public. I mean, it doesn't mean that people are like running through there making noise at all, but I mean, it's a public space.
Oh, we gotta check that out.
Let me just mention something relative to that. It turns out the escalators at 59th Street where the A-train station is, the elevator still works fortunately for you, but the escalator, that's not working either?
So they are going out of service, and right now, almost all of the stations in Manhattan that have an A or a C train, the elevators don't work.
Oh, I hear it, cause they make announcements when
It is
they get to the
Right,
station.
but let me get to my
Yeah.
point. The escalators are actually owned by the building.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, the TA has to rely on the building to do the repairs of the escalators, and now they claim it's not even the escalators, it's actually the infrastructure, there's a canopy above it's made out of concrete that's deteriorating.
Really?
Oh, wow.
And in fact, the head of the MTA, I forget his name, the new guy, Dimitri or something or another, he said it actually makes the MTA look bad, because, you know, people are going on your escalators, they're not their escalators.
Making the MTA look bad.
Yeah. And that's an interesting point, because there are a number of, buildings where in order, you know, to get, zoning or some other benefit, they agree to either upgrade or in some cases create new subway entrances. And all of those entrances are the responsibility of, and some of them even have the plaque that says this is maintained, you know, by
And when they
whatever.
don't work, the MTA website says, you can go and they say like, this elevator is out, this one's out, this is when we expect to be up. When the city doesn't own it, it just says, this is owned by another person, so we're not sure when it's gonna be up.
Oh, man.
And like, to me, that shouldn't be allowed. Like, if you're gonna have an elevator that's in the system, then you should be held to the same standard of like providing, you know, ballpark of when it'll be due, but we're ready.
Actually, part of the entranceways to the Dyckman Street, A Street station are part of that, the building above it.
Mhm.
And some of them look awful, it's better than it used to be.
Yep.
It's a hell of a lot.
So, we're gonna get some more questions on accessibility, we're gonna add questions about, if the project includes enhancements to public space or infrastructure. It is a living document, so folks who have not sent questions, don't be shy.
Can I stab it and then be dead?
It'll come back to life, but it will bite. Is there any old business?
The thing of the
Does Audrey have any updates?
Well, if the committee doesn't have any old or new business, we can ask Audrey if there's anything she'd like to share with us. This part of,
She's just like been just sitting there listening.
well, we,
to
first of all, we appreciate the fact that Audrey from City Planning attends our meetings so very regularly. That's why when we were initially talking about the inward rezoning, we went to it as opposed to EDC, because City Planning is always there for us.
City planning.
Yeah, thank you, Wayne. Thank you, everyone. That is why I'm here, in case questions come up. And at this point, I think that everything was covered, regarding the Inwood rezoning updates and things like that. Yeah, so I do not have anything new to add, or updates of any projects, new or ongoing in the district. But yeah, always here for questions, and let me know if I can connect anyone to any information now or later.
Actually, something just came to mind and I can't remember it exactly, but I emailed you, I think you and Jose, about this months ago after the state of the city, because the mayor announced a new initiative, and you pointed out that you found out about it the day before we found out about it. But I think there's now a public forum or, discussion that's scheduled for that. And you probably know what I'm talking about. I cannot think of the name.
Is it the City of Yes for Families?
Yes.
Okay.
Or whatever they're calling it these days.
So since we last spoke, I have not heard anything, from my department about it. I'm not sure of the status of that initiative. But that's a good flag. I
But there was
don't
there
think,
was an email that went, I don't know if it went to just community, but it couldn't have just gone to community, but where they're inviting, sort of community leaders or whatever, stakeholders to something to discuss it. I have to find, because I think it's maybe this month or next.
I'm looking through my messages now. Possibly I missed it, but I don't see anything. I don't see anything regarding an info session. Could you pass that information along to me?
As soon as I find it,
yeah, amazing. Thank you. But yeah, no updates on our end, and I'll certainly let you know if I hear anything.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Close out. Where do like sidewalks, which committee does that fall under?
Traffic and transportation.
Okay.
Yeah, but DOT is traffic and transportation. Yeah. It is what, 8:38? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Buonanotte a tutti.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
Take
good night.
care all.
What is it, your